Hello and welcome back to another episode of the HRER podcast, where we delve into the world of HR emergencies and scandals. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to HRER on your favourite podcast platform.
Get ready for scandalous stories, lessons learned, and a generous dose of advice for HR professionals for navigating the HR landscape.
Our goal here is not just to entertain, but also to help you learn from the topics we touch on in order to save your business from its own emergency. He discloses that he has recordings that he feels irrelevant. So we asked him if he would like to play them so that we could hear. He said this would be impossible as he has over 300 hours of recordings. We asked how this was possible, and it turns out he has been working with a recording device in his pocket and recording his entire work life for several months.
There was evidence in these recordings that he was being bullied and that he was being, viciously bullied. Is it something that's illegal? Is there a health and safety concern? Has it affected somebody else? Has it affected a customer? Is it someone in a position of responsibility and they've abused it? So the aggravating factors. The key with any dismissal is making sure that we have got a sufficient and robust investigation done. And that isn't just collecting evidence on the company's side of things. It's got to be balanced. Just before we start, protect your business from the risk of tribunal, reduce legal costs, and save yourself from HR headaches with our HRoes software and employment law consultancy services.
Welcome back to episode 23. That was really loud, wasn't it?
It was, of the HRER podcast.
HRER podcast.
I'm Alyssa Thursfield, founder of HRoes.
I'm Ollie Robinson.
You've literally just been told off cross-talking as well. We can keep this in, don't cut this. He's literally just been told off for cross-talking.
Sorry, Alex. I don't want to talk now. I'm going to be really tentative for this one. I'm not really, that's a lie. But yeah, we're back in the hot seats again. We've got a real good one today, a bit GDPR, security.
You're looking forward to this one?
Yeah, it doesn't sound exciting, but...
See, I agree. I don't actually think this sounds like a hot topic. It's one that we've probably sat on for a while, because this is something I dealt with years ago. But it's really caught your attention.
Yeah, I really liked it, just mainly because it's an eccentric individual at the centre of this.
Yeah, there's some real kind of personality in this one.
That's a real kind word to use.
Very PC.
I will read the crisis story out as we normally do. Hi, Alyssa. End of my tether moment here. We've been dealing with the issues with Dave for several months now. The last count was 5 grievances. And we had his disciplinary hearing yesterday in respect of refusal even to follow management instructions. It has taken several weeks to get to hearing. We have dealt with another grievance in that time, and he has robustly refused to cooperate with the investigation. At the hearing, he discloses that he has recordings that he feels irrelevant. So we asked him if he would like to play them so that we could hear. He said this would be impossible as he has over 300 hours of recordings. We asked how this was possible, and it turns out he has been working with a recording device in his pocket and recording his entire work life for several months. He says he believes there is a conspiracy against him, and he did this to prove that he is being bullied and to demonstrate how terrible his working life is. Woe is me. That's not in the email. Don't even know where to start. What do we do?
So this is a real situation, and this is something that actually was litigated. So it did go to tribunal. Employer won in this situation, and this ran for several years. So it was an enormous case, not necessarily because of the complexity of the legal issues or because the employer had necessarily done anything wrong, but it was driven by the behaviour of this individual, which why it became such a long-running matter. And by the time it got to tribunal, there were like thousands of hours of recording. So this situation didn't kind of abate at this point. But what we're going to do is focus on the situation at this point, because we could talk about this one for days.
It went on
if we had to
yeah.
unpick everything that went on in this. So we're going to focus on the issue around these recordings and where we are at this point in the process with the employer.
Okay. 300 hours is a lot anyway, but you said that it went to over 1,000.
Thousands, yeah. So he recorded every interaction he had at work, and not even just interactions. He just sort of left the recording device recording in his pocket throughout his working day. So it captured him when he was in the canteen, arriving at work, general silence while he was working, doing what he did. So he worked on machinery. So while he was working, and there was sort of nobody near him, bathroom breaks.
Like in a warehouse type thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Caught bathroom breaks. He never turned it off.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah, captured everything.
You knew what he had for dinner.
Pretty much.
You could hear the baked potatoes dropping.
Yeah, everything. Yes, everything.
Sorry about that.
So it was a really, really unusual situation. So it's a regular query that I'll get around covert recording from both sides of the coin, really. So I'll get employers who will say, we believe that an employee has maybe recorded a meeting or an interaction covertly, or we'll get the employer saying, well, can we record this interaction before it happens? So it's a query we get often, but generally it's limited to a meeting that we want to talk about, not someone who's been covertly recording his workplace for several months.
I mean, just an observation there. I'm assuming the machinery he was working with made noise.
Lots of noise.
So how did the record... was a lot of the recording just the machine noise?
It was. And the individual actually transcribed this stuff himself. So when you read the transcriptions, it would obviously only transcribe. He wouldn't go kind of noise for 30 seconds, noise for 30 seconds, or anything like that.
It was a personal transcription, like he'd spent manually.
He spent months.
Wow.
Typing these out.
This man should be a PI.
Well, potentially. I mean, you say that. Did he capture anything that was relevant that helped his case? No. But we're gonna get into that as we kind of get through the questions and sort of unpick what he thought he was hoping to achieve.
We will. Let's go for the first question as an employer. Since the recordings involve private conversations, are we required to review or take them into account in the disciplinary process?
So in this situation, because they've been done covertly, and he's captured the personal information of his colleagues, there's a serious issue here. The elephant in the room is, okay, he says there's relevant evidence on these recordings, but also he's, it's a serious conduct issue to be recording your colleagues without them being aware of it. So personal conversations at work, people don't just talk about work at work, they will talk about personal things, they talk about their marriages, their kids, some stuff that you probably wouldn't necessarily want repeating to someone who wasn't involved in a conversation. So there's that as a standalone issue. In this situation, we did say that we would review the content of them because the individual was absolutely convinced that there was evidence in these recordings that he was being bullied and that he was being, viciously bullied. So he said that basically it was making his working life unbearable, that most of the workforce were involved in a conspiracy against him.
Did he use that word?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That he was being isolated by people and that basically every interaction that he was having at work, there was some sort of niggling or pointed behaviour towards him that was making his life intolerable.
Okay. I mean, we'll learn more, but it sounds like he's imagined all this to me.
Well, I'm not gonna give the spoiler away, but because his allegations were so serious, we did agree to review the evidence. So we said, look, well, we will do that. As we will come on to reveal, it didn't really help things for him.
Cool. Second question. Does Dave have the right to secretly record conversations in the workplace? And could these recordings violate any laws related to privacy or workplace surveillance?
So this is a really serious matter. Now, we're going to go, first of all, back to policy and contract, because that's where I like to go first of all.
Safe space.
We will have a rule that will say that you cannot covertly record your colleagues at work, that we don't allow recording devices. And if you wish to record any meetings that take place, you have to have the agreement of everybody in the meeting before you do so. What I usually suggest to a company is if an employee requests to record a meeting, and the concern is that if you say no, that they're going to do it covertly. And look, we're not going to be patting people down or searching them for devices. You just kind of have to trust that if we say don't record, that they're not doing. My advice in these situations often is assume that the meetings are being recorded and behave accordingly. The way to get control of that situation is if someone requests to record and you say, okay, fine, we're happy for the meeting to be recorded, but the company is going to do it on a company device so that the data can be securely stored and that we can have it professionally transcribed.
Okay.
What we don't want is data from a company meeting being held on private devices. We want it under the control of the company so that we are clear on what's being done in terms of data protection. We don't want that walking out the building.
No.
And it's often a question that I ask, which is when people say that we really don't want to record a meeting. Well, why? Why don't you want it recorded? We're taking minutes anyway, which are supposed to be accurate. They're supposed to be a true reflection of the meeting, even if they're not verbatim, so verbatim's word for word. What's the issue with it being recorded? And often it's either a confidence issue that they're worried that if they say something either unintended or they feel they've made a mistake, that has then been crystallized in evidence forever. Whereas with notes and minutes, they can kind of skip over it.
Yeah, of course.
So, which is why my advice is always proceed as if it's being recorded. You should treat every formal meeting as if someone has potentially got their phone in their pocket under the table and you are being recorded. If you haven't got the confidence to conduct the meeting in that environment, well, let's understand why that is. Do we need to do a bit of extra training? Does somebody else need to hold the meeting? Do we not understand the issues enough? Have we not done enough investigation? What is it going to take for us to feel comfortable in that environment? And let's do that as a starting point.
Okay. I mean, you don't want, in this situation, Dave's obviously recorded his own bits and walked out with it.
Yeah.
You don't want, like you say, that leaving and then him potentially, I'm not saying he has done, but manipulating it. Like,
So
deep fake's a big thing now, isn't it?
Yeah. So when this was happening, audio deepfakes weren't really a thing, which makes it sound like it was 20 years ago. It wasn't. The tech has moved very quickly. You know, it's practically yesterday. Not showing my age at all or how long I've been in the legal industry. But particularly these days, yes, there's that concern over manipulation. And with this individual, had we raised that, he would likely have said that he thought the company were going to manipulate it anyway. There was just no trust at all between the employee and the employer at this point. So there'd have been another argument about that anyway. But yes, in terms of what an employee might do with it, you don't know what they could do in terms of manipulating the voices, or where they could release that. You know, if there is something that was said that was unfortunate, then we can address that. We don't want it being plastered all over social media.
No, naturally not. Third question, as an employer, given that Dave is claiming a conspiracy and has refused to cooperate with the investigation, how should we proceed with the disciplinary process?
So this became an impossible situation. By the time we got to dismissal, I think we'd had 9-10 grievances.
What, like, based loosely on?
Bullying, victimisation, discrimination, whatever, you know, there was health and safety complaints. Yeah, so he raised lots and lots and lots of complaints. And then, so every grievance then had an appeal process that was then concluded. And then some of the later grievances, he was trying to reopen old grievances, which we can't do. That's kind of one of the golden rules of grievances, is that you can't open a new one to deal with an old one. It's done and dealt with. So this kind of grew a life of its own. It became a monster case. And at the same time as we're dealing with all these grievances, we then did actually have disciplinary offences that we were having to deal with, where his colleagues were making allegations against him in terms of his behaviour, saying that he was a bully, that he was goading them, that there were health and safety concerns with the way that he was working as well. So every time we invited him to a disciplinary, there would then be a grievance raised. So it's becoming a situation where the company processes became impossible to operate. And this was one of those situations where fundamentally we got to one of my favourite types of dismissal. Not that I should have a favourite, but you know, that's HR and employment law.
How callous.
How callous is the SOSR, which is some other substantial reason.
I remember you mentioning this in the office before.
And we have said, I promised that we were going to get to talk about this.
The SOSR.
I can't. Oh my God. You know what? I love talking to someone who isn't in HR and employment law, because no one has ever called it
the SOSR.
The SOSR. No, we're not adopting that. The SOSR dismissal.
Yeah. Let's stay on that.
Oh, that gave me a belly laugh.
Yeah, you move visibly. You move.
Yeah, literally. No. And there's going to be people listening going, that's not funny. Such an employment law geek. Oh, I don't care. That was hilarious.
Thanks.
So the SOSR dismissal is where we have a situation that has become impossible, and where we're saying, because of this impossible situation, your employment can't continue. So where it's been used is where you have husband and wife working together in the same workplace, small business, they get divorced and the situation becomes totally toxic. So where they're arguing in the workplace and they're bringing people onto their team within their colleagues, and you've got cliques and people not talking, and she won't work with him and he won't be in on the days that she's in the office.
Just bad.
It becomes impossible. And it's not necessarily that there's a conduct issue. It's not that it's performance. No one's redundant. It's just become bloody impossible to manage the workplace with this situation going on. What we don't do is just dismiss the woman, which seems to be the solution that I'm often presented with by companies is, can we get rid of her?
Really?
Why do you want to get rid of her? No, you get rid of both of them.
What? There was one we did about this.
Yeah, and
it
smacks of sex discrimination in these situations. And often where we see it, where you have a senior male who's either had an affair or a relationship or whatever with a more junior female, is that when the relationship breaks down, that he will often demand that she's removed. And we've got to be so careful in these situations because, if just because you've got someone in a powerful position, where there's a gender or a power imbalance, we've got to be really, really careful because you can end up in serious hot water. But yeah, in a situation like that, it might be that we remove both of them or we give them the option to redeploy or whatever. So that's what SOSR is for. But the situation has to be genuinely impassable, that there's no other way around it, that we can't look at conflict reduction, we can't mediate, we can't move people around or look at role adjustments. It's got to be, we have hit the wall in this situation. And we have to be able to really show as well the impact it's having on the business.
Yeah, naturally.
In this situation, we had someone who would no longer take instructions from their manager because he believed that the manager was involved in a conspiracy. Every time he was given any sort of constructive criticism or asked to do something he didn't want to do, he would raise a grievance. Every time the grievance didn't go his way, he would then raise an appeal and then raise another grievance against the appeal officer and say that the appeal officer was in on the conspiracy.
He knows the system by this time.
He wouldn't attend disciplinary hearings because, again, this was all part of the big conspiracy against him. We couldn't operate company processes. He just would not cooperate. He wouldn't engage with us. And what's really, really important in these situations is that we don't just go, oh, well, we've had one go at it, that's SOSR. It's not. This ran, I'd say, for a couple of years before we got to the point where we just said, look, we just have no tools left in our armory to kind of address these situations with you. And that's when we got to dismissal. And it was a safe dismissal. The tribunal did find in the company's favour and said that this was an impossible situation because of his behaviour.
Just to go back there a little bit, you mentioned like power imbalances in the workplace amongst men and women. Prime example at the minute, the Al Fayed thing.
100%.
In news, like, I've seen all the victims were on this, I think it was This Morning or something, like all together. They've become like friends now, which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
Granted, like it's come from a real venomous sort of source, but like that's a prime example. This big owner of HRoes, like, and he just rushed it under the carpet for
politically politically connected, royal connections, extraordinarily powerful, wealthy individual, and then people who held relatively junior jobs.
They were floor staff.
Yeah, that their views that they were just never going to be believed, and that you've then got the concern of, will I ever be able to find a job again? When you've got someone who's that level of influence, that level of power, who can affect your future employment prospects, it's a very, very vulnerable position to be in. So it's really, really important, and this is something that I really address very strongly in the sexual harassment training that I do, is that when we are talking about accusations against senior individuals, yes, we have to investigate properly. We have to, get to the bottom of stuff. We do not sweep things under the carpet just because someone's senior. And if we find that someone senior has committed sexual harassment, we deal with that robustly. It is gross misconduct. That is potentially grounds for terminating someone's employment. How senior they are in a business does not buy them a hall pass. That's not a reason for them to stay in their job if they've committed serious sexual misconduct. So that's where difficult decisions have to be made. And in this situation that we're talking about, the difficult decision here was, one, have we reached the point where this situation has become utterly impossible? But also, for the employer, is there smoke without fire? He was raising so many serious allegations that at one point HR were questioning themselves, going, well, have we missed this? Have we got this dreadful culture where someone's being bullied and harassed and it's affecting their mental health? Are we missing something? So they did. They really committed to this for a couple of years to try and get to the bottom of it for him. But there was nothing in it.
It sounds like they're asking all the right questions of themselves, but untenable, like you say. Final question from an employer standpoint. If we decide to proceed with dismissal, how can we best protect the company from an unfair dismissal claim, which sounds like it was quite likely?
So in this situation, what came out of the recordings was that this individual was not being bullied. And what we heard was hours and hours and hours of him goading his colleagues to try and get a reaction.
Okay.
And that then when he got a reaction, it was, look, this is what they've said. That's bullying. But kind of wasn't prepared to recognise the behaviour that he was doing.
Lack of accountability.
That he was kind of provoking and provoking and provoking. Yeah. And I'm not saying that any kind of backlash to provoking behaviour is acceptable. But you could see what was going on in this situation. So we had a decision here whether we, again, attempted disciplinary proceedings in respect of that behaviour that was coming out, or whether we went down the route of, the impossible situation, which is what we did here. Now, the key with any dismissal is making sure that we have got a sufficient and robust investigation done. And that isn't just collecting evidence on the company's side of things. It's got to be balanced. We can't ignore evidence that doesn't go in our favour. It's got to be balanced. That we go through a fair process. So an employee knows why they're being invited to a meeting, what the potential outcome could be, that they've got the right to be accompanied, that they should be given the evidence in advance of a meeting, and that they can submit evidence as well. At the hearing, that they've got the chance to have their say, to challenge any evidence that's been put against them, and that everything is considered before we then come to a decision. And that decision has to be reasonable. So the sanction that we apply has to be reasonable when you look at the level of conduct, when we look at the evidence that we've got. So if we're choosing misconduct as the reason for dismissal, that one, we're reasonable in allocating something as misconduct, and that the sanction that we're applying isn't an overreaction.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to SOSR, it's slightly different because we're not necessarily looking at misconduct. It's an impossible situation, but we've got that same reasonableness that we've got to apply. Are we being reasonable in our conclusion in saying that this is an impossible situation? And it's that kind of really cool-headed look at, are we being reasonable in what we're doing? That was one of the drivers behind the disciplinary stuff that I've built in the software. I designed, the developers built. Haven't acquired a whole new coding skill set since the last pod. And one of the things that I am regularly asked, and this is by HR consultants and HR teams, I would say, rather than necessarily companies, is when you've got people in the trenches and that they're dealing with an element of misconduct, is that in the heat of the moment and when it's all kind of happening around you, you can convince yourself that something's more serious than it is.
Okay.
And having someone who's not necessarily going to put the brakes on, but to be that, can I just check this with you?
1 minute.
Yeah, and I'm that kind of cool-headed objective where they can ring and go, this is what I'm planning on doing. What do you think?
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily saying they're right or they're wrong. It might be, sounding board. I might say, have we thought about this? Have we thought about that? 9 times out of 10, I'm like, yeah, crack on. And what we've put in the system is, I was hoping we'd get a jazzier name for it, but I think it's still the disciplinary decider.
It
is the facts of the matter get put in and it acts as the brakes. So if we think something's gross misconduct and we're thinking, we're heading on for dismissal, that the system may go, whoa, I don't think we're quite in that territory yet. Mm-hmm. And it gets us to kind of think again on a situation before we do something that could be irretrievable and could land us in tribunal. Yeah. So it's not telling us what to do, but it's kind of helping us moderate those decisions. And what it prompts you to do is think about why I think this is gross misconduct. Is it something that's illegal? Is there a health and safety concern? Has it affected somebody else? Has it affected a customer? Is it someone in a position of responsibility and they've abused it? So the aggravating factors. But then it also looks at things like, well, have they apologised? Did they accept guilt early on? Have they got a clean record, long service? Is it out of character for them? So all those sorts of things that where we do that balancing exercise, where it's really easy to look at the things that make it more serious and kind of forget about the stuff that actually kind of potentially reduces how serious something is. So it's really important that we go through that exercise. And when I was talking about the process we go through, that's a long list. Yes. There's a lot of stuff to go in those letters. There's a lot of things to think about to make sure that the meeting is held in a compliant and a fair way. It's all built in the system.
So over a long period of time as well with this one, you've got things like recency bias. Do you know what I mean? Where like the latest point might stick in your brain and it might be something particularly close to home personally.
Exactly.
Get you to act in a certain way.
Yeah.
But
and having everything in one place. So in the system, you can see the global view over a situation. All your evidence is there. The invitation letters are there. They're all compliant. That we get the steps in the right order for that meeting because it's all built in that workflow and in that process with the templates there.
All your notes are there and everything. Yeah.
Exactly.
Documents the lot.
Yeah. So it gives HR and it gives, senior leaders or whoever's running these processes the ability to be in the driving seat without getting distracted by, well, have I done this? Have I done that? Because the system's going to check it for you.
And believe me, I've tested it vigilantly.
Vigilantly?
So it's foolproof. Employee questions now. We've got 3 of these. First one, what are my rights when it comes to submitting evidence like recordings during a disciplinary hearing? And can I insist on playing my recordings as part of my defence?
So an employee can submit evidence for a disciplinary hearing. So that invitation letter should be inviting an employee to send their evidence in.
Right.
Now, the format that it's looked at, I would say if we're listening to audio recordings, that's going to take a long time. Unless there is a specific reason why we have to listen to it rather than read a transcript. An employee should be verbalizing that to say, look, this is the reason why I want you to hear it. So it could be actually that we have pages and pages of transcript, but actually there's only about a minute that we need to listen to. So it could be voice intonation or something like that actually can't really be captured in a transcript. So being very clear on the reasons why. If you're just being disruptive and you want a disciplinary hearing to listen to 400 hours of audio, back to that reasonableness test. A company disciplinary process isn't a court. It's not a tribunal. We only have to decide things on balance and being reasonable. Is it reasonable in a conduct situation where we've got evidence of potentially gross misconduct to listen to 400 hours of potentially irrelevant recordings? Probably not.
Definitely not.
So I'd say from an employee perspective, being disruptive for the purposes of being disruptive to make your employer's life difficult, it's often something that is spotted by judges, and it's something that employers can use to their advantage when they want to show that your conduct is poor and that you're not cooperating. So I see it as a tactic regularly, but it very, very rarely gets the employee very far, and it doesn't really do them any favours. Cooperation, engagement, questioning evidence, and really kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of that situation and defending yourself properly is always going to put you in better stead in a disciplinary situation.
Definitely, and just trying to pick fights at every corner. Second question, can my actions of recording conversations without informing others be considered a violation of company policies or laws, and could this affect my case?
100%. In this situation, had we not dismissed for SOSR, we'd have probably dismissed for gross misconduct on the grounds that he'd been covertly recording.
It's actually illegal now. I've mentioned this before. It's illegal to, if I would sit down here and record you saying something. And
well, that's the whole point of a podcast, Ollie, that we're recording what we're saying.
But if I had an idea that you were going to say something bad, isn't it entrapment?
So, we're drifting
Big
sort of
word,
out of employment stuff. Entrapment, it's a very sort of, I'd say, almost US concept. But fundamentally, at a basic level, often it's in your contract of employment or your policies that you may not covertly record your colleagues at work. So that's kind of where we want to make it easy. We don't want to be digging into privacy laws, because in the UK, it's a very kind of grey area around privacy. We're not as defined as perhaps the United States. So one of the key cases over here was Catherine Zeta-Jones, Michael Douglas. They sued, I think it was Hello magazine or one of those, over long lens photography that was taken of their wedding. And they said they had a reasonable expectation of privacy and that had been breached. So huge case. And ultimately in the UK, particularly with people in the public eye, there's this question of a reasonable expectation of privacy. If we're saying people at work have got a reasonable expectation of privacy, then we're kind of going, well, can we use CCTV? Can we not? Even though we're saying the CCTV's there and it's there for health and safety reasons, I wouldn't be getting into that argument. I would have a policy that says you may not covertly record at work under any circumstances. If you feel that for some reason you need to record something because your health's at risk or your safety's at risk or there's an issue, you report it to a line manager. You don't take matters into your own hands.
It's strange behaviour, man.
It is. And when you get that kind of vigilante behaviour, when we're at that point where we have no trust in anyone that we're recording, the trust and confidence is gone in the relationship. We're already at rock bottom where we've potentially got grounds to consider whether we're at that SOSR point. So I wouldn't be getting myself tied up in legal knots over it. Make sure it's in your policy. You can't covertly record at work.
Simple as that. Final question as an employee. If I believe I have been unfairly treated or bullied at work, what steps can I take to ensure that my complaints and evidence are taken seriously? So
companies have a grievance process for a reason. It's one of the key rights that employees have in the UK. So even if you don't have a grievance policy, ACAS and our employment laws give people the right to be able to raise formal complaints at work. It's why we have a grievance process built into our software so that employees can go onto the software and they can raise a grievance like that if they wish to. And it's something that I get asked by employers, which is, well, why we don't want to make it too easy for people to raise a grievance. But actually, if someone has to fight to get the process started,
Bad that.
we're already kind of in a position of more conflict. Is that actually we want to make this easy for an employee to do, user-friendly, and so that we can engage, so that we can show, yes, we welcome feedback. If there's a problem, let us know so that we can address it. It's that conflict reduction standpoint, again, rather than going toe-to-toe and being on the defensive all the time. So if there's something going wrong in the workplace, I'd always say try and raise it informally first. So go to your line manager, go to HR and say, look, this is happening. I'm not sure what to do with it, whether I need a formal process or is this something I can resolve informally. 9 times out of 10, things can get resolved informally just by raising it with somebody. If that doesn't help, then that's where the formal grievance process is for. And the obligation there is on the employer to investigate. So if you have relevant evidence, it's making sure that you give it to the investigatory officer or you make it available before the grievance hearing. If you keep evidence and think, well, I'm going to keep this in my back pocket and then if things don't go my way, I'll produce it in tribunal, that's not going to help you because an employer is judged based on the information that they had available to them and the decision that they then made. If you conceal something from them and they had no way of knowing that that existed, they're not going to be criticised for it. So be open, engage in the process, follow the company policies and procedures. Don't think of it as something strategic and think, well, if I don't cooperate, this is going to make them look bad. Engage in the process. Think about conflict reduction. Think about how can we get to the end of this where both parties are going to be happy with the outcome because you want that employment relationship to continue.
Yeah, it's not chess, is it?
Exactly.
It's not a chess conflict, like you're trying to work towards a resolution. The million-dollar question. What emergency measures can HR departments take to stop this from happening in the future?
So check your policies and your contracts for what we've got in there around covert recording. If you have got an employee where you can see that things aren't quite right, if you've got someone who is perceived to be a bit of a serial troublemaker or has issues getting on with their colleagues, have an informal sit down with them, have a bit of a welfare meeting with them, try and check in. So again, thinking about that conflict reduction rather than waiting for a formal complaint to come.
And with this one as well, can you summarise what happened? I mean, I can imagine what happened.
Yeah, so this ran for years. It was in tribunal for several years. The company won. So I think in the end there were over 100 allegations that were brought against the business in tribunal.
From this one guy?
From the one person. Like I say, it ran for a very, very, very long time. Company won, individual then tried to appeal. The appeal was rejected. So the company came out of it in good stead. The decision to dismiss was found to be safe. They were found to have acted fairly and reasonably and actually put up with some pretty unacceptable behaviour for a long time to try and essentially give the guy the chance to snap out of it. Because he accused everyone he was working with, his line manager, the company, the global board, the health insurance company, the tribunal, everybody was in on this conspiracy, according to him. He couldn't see the wood for the trees. He became so entrenched in his own dispute that it entirely took over his life. And it was a sad situation in some respects, but because of his inability to let it go and because the relationship descended to such a low point, it's something that we've talked about in a previous pod, which is that once someone becomes entrenched, once they've got their position and their pride is at stake, it's very, very hard for people to back down.
Yeah, they're stuck.
So we want to nip this kind of thing in the bud. You don't want to let something like this escalate as far as it did. But I'd say the company wasn't to blame necessarily for that escalation because there were lots of opportunities that they offered, but this individual just wouldn't back down. Had a good outcome though for the business.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, on a more sort of it's a non-employment law now. Like if you're looking around at people and you think like everyone else is the problem, it's probably you, isn't it? It's probably not everyone else.
Potentially. And I actually read a really interesting article, I think it was in New Scientist, and it was around negative behaviours. And there was a study, I think it was Michigan University. If I'm wrong about this, then if New Scientists want to reach out and tag us, great, anything for the algorithm. And it was around negative behaviour and people who... it said that it is healthy to air negative feelings and say this didn't go well and to kind of blow off steam. But if we don't stop at some point and we continue to focus on something, that actually the negative behaviour becomes worse and it gets harder to move on from something. And that the healthier thing to do is, yes, talk about things, tell people what's bothering you, air it, but then problem solve. So take that step back, take an objective view and think, right, well, what can I learn from this situation? What can I do to stop this happening another time? So we're learning from life experiences and we're able to move on rather than getting into that cycle of negative feeling. And I found that really, really interesting. And particularly from the perspective of like the management training that I do around negative thoughts, negative feeling, and being able to move on from difficult situations, is taking those life lessons and what have I learned from this situation and then being able to move on.
Yeah, I mean, don't hold it in. It's not a loss, it's a lesson. That's another cold saying. Cold, as Cole Palmer would do. That's it. That's all I've got time for. Anything you want to add, or just...
No, just thank you so much. We've seen a amazing surge in listenership. Listenership, is that a word? Anyway, listeners,
now.
it is now, in listeners lately. So fantastic that we're having so many people now coming and listening. The feedback that we've had has been brilliant as well. So thank you so much for those who are continuing to download each week, and for the fantastic stories as well that people have been submitting. So I have had clients, which is amazing, saying, please use this on the podcast. So there's some that we've used and some that we will get to, but thank you so much for the support. We're really, really enjoying doing this, and it makes it so much more enjoyable that you guys are enjoying listening as well.
It does. I mean, we hit 140 downloads in one day, didn't we, the other day, which was...
And we're into the thousands of
four
downloads.
Figures,
yeah,
4 figures. But yeah, I echo the same thoughts. Thanks for watching, everyone. Like, comment, subscribe. Cheers.